Talk to me, talk to me, talk to me. Your magical kiss will take me just so far. Talk to me, talk to me, talk to me. Don't leave me like this, dangling from a star. Set me all aflame and it's so pleasing. It sure would be a shame if you were only teasing. So my love, before I go, turn the lights way down low and talk to me. Talk to me, talk to me.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, on a rainy one. It's the Don McKeag Show, and we welcome you. Ken Bukes here is in the control room and will be sometimes interjecting questions, but you have an opportunity to call. And our number will be up on the screen shortly. It's up there now. Election time. If you notice, I have my tie on. I am not ashamed to wear the tie, fly the flag on a regular basis, but some are today. Some don't consider it important to vote. Only 1/3 of the population, I guess, that's registered to vote. Of course, they don't mention that because of the huge amount of unregistered, undocumented, quote, illegal people that represent probably 1/3 now of our population. But one of the sad things I've seen over the course of my life is to see people who are easily led by God and say so. They have a deep, deep belief in a power that's greater than themselves. Doesn't matter what religion. It matters about a human being recognizing he or she is not in charge. That's not the case today in liberal-controlled, the leftist part of America. So I wear this tie. I'll show you where today's, after this election, and we'll get to it, where today's enlightened forces that have now started to dictate the rules of the game in polls taken recently and for years, when asked whether people thought the flag should be burned, 80% said no. They did not feel that was a right. 20% said yes. When polled about "In God We Trust" being in the Pledge of Allegiance or whatever we want to put that kind of saying on the dollar bill, 86% of the people believe it should stay there. Only 14%, look it up, only 14% are against it. Why does the United States of America now cater to just the minority? We're not talking about rights now. We are talking about taking the rights away from the majority to please and appease a minority, some of whom are not even here legally. We now have people, though, that become naturalized from foreign countries that then demand rights from us, you and I, who pay for it. Well, as I do on my radio show on Saturdays, mark it down, by the way, it's WXTK 95.1. Kenny's got it right up on the screen. Saturdays, every Saturday from 11 to 1. Be glad to have you listen in to that. And by the way, let me interject. I run into people now in Plymouth and Carver who have seen the show. It's a tough hour. It's supper time. The regular news is on. I know a lot of people eat in front of the TV now. My mother would go, she'd roll over in a grave. We could never watch TV during supper. We had to eat first, although that changed, I guess, later on when my father started squeezing out into watching the ball games or something, the World Series. But anyway, in my radio show and on this show, every single session, I feel it important to read this quote by Martin Luther. Not Martin Luther King, Martin Luther, whom Martin Luther King was named after by his father, a minister. Martin Luther in 1526 makes this statement. Cowardice asks the question, is it safe? Expediency asks the question, is it politic? Vanity asks the question, is it popular? But conscience asks the question, is it right? And there comes a time when one must take a position that is neither safe, nor politic, nor popular, but he must take it because his conscience or her conscience tells him it is right. This is what we now have become. We're afraid. Too many are afraid of offending, afraid to speak their mind, and therefore they just allow others to dictate the rules of the game. And it is really dangerous. I listened to President Obama. I've always respected the president, always. In all my life, I go all the way back. The first president I remember was Harry Truman as a kid, then Eisenhower. Then I could vote for Jack Kennedy. But I have never seen a person who is so personable, his persona is likable at times, but he cannot withhold the arrogance and the idea that he is the only answer. Now, I know some that might be Democrats of favor of Obama. This offends them. I don't want this to be right, but last night, he pretty much thumbed his nose at the voters. And if you notice these little subtle things that if you're not just in the tank for someone, that's everything. If you're not in the tank, then your mind is inquiring and noticing body language and noticing wording. Last night he talks about the voters. He stressed that he heard the 2/3 who did not vote. I hear you too. That wasn't what he was saying. He was saying, I know 2/3 of you don't agree with the results of this election. For you, I'm still going to work. And this is consistent with liberal socialist Democrats who were, until Tuesday, running the roost totally. That's how they feel about illegal immigration. That's how they feel about food stamps. That's how they feel about people who refuse to work and get free food, free health care, free housing. They honestly feel that people who do not participate, who do not pay taxes, that can and should, have rights. Of course, we know they have unalienable rights to the pursuit of happiness, but happiness never was meant to be sitting on your fanny doing nothing. That was a very telling statement that I wonder how many picked up on. I heard the 2/3 that didn't vote. In other words, that's consistent with what I just said. Liberals still, not only do they support the minority, gay rights now supersedes and did supersede majority rights. It's not equal treatment now, it's special treatment. You don't have to like it, but again, we now have a country, it's not Republican, Democrat, Independent, it's rational thinking. It's people who have some kind of logical power in their brain and use it. I say these things, I'm never threatened, never been. When someone calls or tells me, Don, this is not so, what you just said this, and this is what the truth is, I'm not offended. That's truth. I'm not offended. I want, and so should everyone, want to know the truth about, I don't care what it is. Definition, wording, some. I mean, the way people think today in the left, I mean, 2 and 2 can be 5. And they will tell you that it can be. That 2 and 2 can be 3. That's how insane it has gotten. Well, I just wanted to say, you know, this was an election that talked to the country, despite the bias of the media, of the liberal press. It talked not just about Obama. Let's get this perfectly clear. Obama's one man. Yes, he's the president. Yes, he wields a lot of power. But he's not the only problem. We have senators, we have congressmen, we have local officials who are not concerned with the truth. They are concerned with their agenda, totally. You go against their agenda, you prove them wrong, they don't change their mind, they don't say, gee, you're right, they get mad. And they get even. I guess that's probably why so many are Irish. Notice this last election, Charlie Baker and Coakley. I shudder to think the dirty tricks that were being pulled and the voting fraud that went on in the city of Boston, Worcester, Fall, all the big cities with the labor unions control the roost. And there is no oversight. Let me tell you, I know. I was a dyed-in-the-wool Democrat for years. I know the workings. And a lot of it's Irish, and I'm Irish. And it's shameful. That's why I read Martin Luther. There comes a time when conscience tells you whether it's right or wrong. And we've had people, and I keep saying, the worst thing to me to hear today that's so allowable. Oh, they all do it. One, it's not fair to those who don't, but more importantly, it's not true. Every president has not had an affair with another woman the way the left and the women who supported Bill Clinton and my personal favorite, Jack Kennedy. I thought he brought a lot to the table. But when that came out about what was going on, that is not a person's personal life. It is a total disregard for the security and safety of every one of us here, because it allows them to be extorted, ladies who loved Clinton and Jack Kennedy. It is not their personal life. Yes, they're human. I don't deny that. When you're president of the United States, we cannot afford to have you put in a position where you can be extorted by China, by the Arab nations, by our enemies. And that's exactly why it's wrong. But you can't say that, especially when it's a Democrat. When it's a Republican, like Nixon, impeach them, get them out, and they're successful in that. I have a couple of things here that I wanted to talk about, but we'd love to have a call. We don't get many, but that's all right. I'll just babble for an hour and hopefully give you some information that you can use at the coffee shop, use at the dinner table when you have these college students and graduates who've been subjected to the 92+% of liberal instructors that we have, and instruction. I was a teacher, loved it, loved the kids, taught English, talked about the universals, the things that matter, the things that are always and always have been in mankind, and what we have to be leery of. The 7 deadly sins being the most. Greed, sloth, envy. Those 3 are running America today. That's why we're in the mess we're in. And it's right at the top. It's right in the Senate, right in Congress. They want to get reelected. They love the notoriety. They love the position. And they've now determined their own salaries and health care. Imagine, when I used to go to Palm Beach in the winter. By the way, I was a restaurant owner, so I know what it is to own a business, to make a payroll, to pay insurance premiums that get higher and higher. The more people you hire, the more you pay for workman's comp. Not in government, doesn't matter. Every single employee, the money the government takes out for Social Security, the employer has to match. I'd say probably at least 80% of the population has no understanding of that. I keep bringing it up because it's another thing that people don't understand. But when I used to stay down in Palm Beach in the winters, I read in the Palm Beach Post, again, 20 years ago, federal employees, on the average, were making 35% more working for the government than the same job was paying in the private sector. That's bad enough, because we all pay those salaries, and those salaries aren't determined by a profit and loss statement. They're determined by a union today, or determined by, oh, let's give them a raise because it's not coming out of their pocket. Like school committees, building committees. Nice people, somebody else's money was coming out of their personal account. You'd see schools being built a lot cheaper, and you'd see teachers' salaries a lot more in line with what they should be. But, again, you speak the truth. On top of the 35%, now 20 years ago, you don't think it's gotten better, do you? Tell me one thing in government that gets cheaper. On top of 35% more, imagine how much money that is. If you're making $75,000 in the private sector as a, say, an administrator, and the person with basically the same job in a government department is making $110,000, that's bad enough for the reasons I just told you. But on top of that, 20 years ago, this was in Palm Beach Post and, by the way, in the Los Angeles Times. They get 400% more benefits. At that time, government workers' benefits totaled almost $20,000 in value. Same job, private sector, was, I think, the figures are off to my mind now, but it was like $4,500. Big difference. Yeah, $4,500 up to $17,000, something like that difference. Imagine what that translates into real dollars. That's what's happened with this socialist Democratic Party. They're socialists. You that are in the Democratic Party, you that work for Democrats, face it. You won't, but it's socialism. Period. And if you're an educated person, look up the record of socialism throughout history. It doesn't work. And the reason it doesn't work is because it takes away the motivation factor. When you know you now can dictate your salary, your health care, and your vacation time, and your raises, with no thought to a bottom line or whether you can afford it or not. Now, the question on casinos passed heavily. Just, again, absolute proof of the idiocy that's going on in today's America. I guarantee senior citizens, by and large, voted for it. And I love that ad that they had about it was going to provide so many more jobs for communities. Again, I've said this for 2 weeks, Kenny, right? I've been talking about Atlantic City. It's been there, I don't know, over 25 years. Trump put millions into it. They're broke. They're closing down. Mohegan Sun, $3 billion in debt. By debt, I mean that's what they have to pay. And they can't get refinanced. This was 5 or 6 years ago. Now, tell me, I know people go to Foxwoods and say it's half full when they go now where it used to be packed. Where is the rationale? Where is the logic for having more? There are tax dollars. Call me and tell me why. That's what we have here, Ken, right?
508.
We do have a phone.
508.
It's right up there. I don't have to read it. Yeah.
3971 if you agree or disagree with Mr. McKay.
By the way, I have to lighten up. I have a little story that I got a kick out of because this applies to a lot. I guess it would apply to Halloween, which has gone by.
Trick or treat.
Or by the way, I had to drive up to Needham today. It was brutal to a urologist, and you women, you know about your exam. Well, Amanda has certain things too that are sometimes forgotten that we have to go through.
Just as embarrassing.
Just as embarrassing. You're in just as bad a position, almost.
Yes.
Well, anyway, this joke I told to my urologist, and at first he didn't get it, like a lot of you won't, but then he got it. But it also, to me, as I'm driving over here tonight, why I'm going to tell it, is it's very indicative of government. A skeleton walks into a bar. Well, he doesn't walk in, he kind of rattles in, Walks in, sits at the bar, and there's 3 or 4 people there. They look, and the bartender looks. Finally walks over to him and says, "Excuse me, sir." He said, "Yep." He said, "Can I get you something?" The skeleton says, "Yeah, I'll have a beer and a mop." Now those that go, "What is that all about?"
I got it.
You got it. All right, now we know where the beer goes. Why? Because he's a skeleton. Why I say that's good for the urologist is because, of course, that's one of the tests. And, of course, Halloween is obvious. But I got thinking about government. They just pour money in and it leaks right through onto God knows where. People will not understand that one of the problems with immigration being out of control, this is something Obama would never understand, or most politicians, because, as I've said before, they have no background. Zero, zilch, nil. They've never owned a business, never made a payroll. Half of them studied political science in college, then went to work for a politician as a gopher or runaround. Then they decide to go to law school. Then they come out, they're not going to practice law because half of them are mediocre. Sorry. So they go into politics. That's their background. We've got a guy that was president. What was he? A community, worker. Never owned a thing. And that's perfectly okay. Perfectly okay.
I read a piece today, Donnie.
Speak up so they can. Have you got a mic on?
I've got a
Oh,
microphone
goody,
here.
good.
I don't
Okay,
know if
I
they
just
can
want
hear
to.
me.
I want you to be heard.
I don't know if they can hear me at home, though. I read a piece today, and it was on Twitter. And some people go with it and some don't. But there was a check cut today by Mr. Wynn for
Casino, you mean? Casino win.
Casino Win. And I thought I read, and I'm scrolling through Twitter right now, but I thought I read, yes, it was right. Win cuts state $85 million check for casino license 2 days after the repeal question failed.
Yep.
That's in the Cape Cod Times today.
Yep.
And it's supposed to bring jobs.
Yeah.
The only people that are going to get jobs, Donnie, are the construction people.
Yeah.
And then when it's built, what's that going to do to the cherry sheets for the Mass State Lottery? Because there won't be anybody going into those casinos.
I came up with a brilliant statement on my radio the other day, if I do say so. We're talking about robbing Peter to pay Paul, which is what you've just talked about. There's only so much gambling that can go on any more than there's only so many restaurants, so many everything. But government doesn't think that way, see? But if you, now I call it, in terms of our immigration policy, we're robbing Peter to pay Pedro.
Yes.
Because let me tell you, now, I read you folks, that those regulars, by the way, thank you. I've heard from 3 different people, and Kenny's heard, that have caught the show by accident, but now they listen. And I know I've got regulars now that watch, and we're sorry we missed a couple of weeks.
They're out there.
But they're out there, and we thank you. And you don't have to participate, but I really appreciate your watching us. That being said, it is just so disconcerting to people that get into my age that have gone through really 50 years of learning. Okay, 50 years of learning. That means as a young adult right up to now as an old guy. And to see things that were tried and true, to see things that mattered, to see things that held us together. It's so sad, and unfortunately, when they get an inroad, these people, these liberals, and I'm sorry. Now, those of you that call yourself liberal, I'm not talking about people that are... I was a Democrat because I was fiscally conservative, which I will always be, which everyone is supposed to be, especially politicians. That's all forgotten. But I was socially liberal. One of the things that infuriates me was when I hear these people that honestly can say, Republicans want to get rid of Social Security. I mean, they don't know what one they're talking about. And it's a presumption that Republicans don't have retired parents or grandparents or people who are sick. That's, again, it's insanity, and it works. And that tells you what we've got out there in the population. But anyway, Kenny, as far as casinos, it just, again, and remember, it is a sin to gamble if you talk to the ancient powers that be, because first of all, it's a wasteful, habit-forming, potentially habit-forming pastime.
Right. Correct.
For every job that's created, let me tell you, down the road, not for everyone, but proportionally, there will be an addict created that then we have to treat, but we don't have a chance. We can treat him or her, but we don't have a chance to treat the kids and the spouse that now has lost their home, their car, everything, thanks to the gambling addiction. Now, I'm not suggesting there shouldn't be gambling, but again, it's putting the fire out when it's in the house, or I should say, it's looking at the garage and not caring about the house. We don't care about foundation anymore, I'm sorry to say. One of the things I want to talk about was Jefferson.
Before you go
Yes, go ahead, Kenny.
while you find your paperwork, somebody called me up the other day, and they were over at the local health club here in Plymouth. And normally, when this guy talks to me, he says that he gets on a treadmill and he only does about 15 to 20 minutes.
Yes.
What was hysterical about this conversation was he turned on the rerun of your show.
Yes.
And worked out for 45 minutes.
Well, he's obviously got a brain. He's obviously intelligent.
What I want to say,
and he's selective.
People should not be afraid to walk up to you and say that they either listen to you on WXTK every Saturday morning from 11 to 1, or they watch you on PAC TV. Don't be embarrassed. You're a gracious man.
Who's embarrassed? I'm not embarrassed a bit.
Some people just want to be in the sidelines and say, "Oh, I saw him on TV." And they're afraid to occupy your space. I'm saying, don't be afraid. Donnie's approachable. Walk up, say hello, tell him you watch him, tell him you hear him. I'm off the soapbox now, Donnie.
Well, aren't you good? Well, you just brought up something interesting, though, Kenny. Those that are regular listeners on the radio or know that I owned restaurants on the Cape, the Flying Bridge, and the Ace of Burris House, and the backside, and played the piano. And I'm not saying this boasting, it's just my background, so that I knew and I love knowing so many good people. And in the process, when I was a Democrat and worked with and became very close to Senator Ted Kennedy, who I loved personally. Didn't always agree with his politics. Didn't agree with some of the things that I feel he had, some of the problems, but well-intended. But we used to have a party at his house on Fridays after Thanksgiving. This is the kind of man he was. He'd have his friends over every Friday. And what made this great was, if you remember, those of us old enough, the saddest day to this day, and I'm in my 70s, the saddest day in my entire life was the death of John Kennedy. I was up at UMass in Amherst, and it was horrible. And those of us that were young adults or older know it was just tragic. It was horrible. And it was just before Thanksgiving, the 23rd of November. And I remember football games were called off, and everything was just in a terrible thing. And the Kennedy family always had a big day on Thanksgiving at their house. And after that, of course, it was terrible, and the house was pretty much kept down a little bit, although they still had their own family kind of things. But when Ted bought the house from his mother and moved there, he decided, by the way, all the times I was in that house, ladies and gentlemen, I want to tell you, there was never sadness, never anything except uplifting, just an aura around, especially with him around. He would not allow any of that. But anyway, so at the party on one Friday after Thanksgiving, I was playing the piano, and I had started doing my conservative talk radio show every morning on the Cape. And Ted addressed, as he would, he'd get up and talk to all the people, and he'd say, how many of you, by the way, this is Rush Limbaugh of Cape Cod, and he was giving me the razz. So he said, Kenny, how many of you out here listen to Donnie? This goes to your statement. And here are all these dyed-in-the-wool Democrats, and you'd know the names if I told you, wonderful people, and they're still really good friends. And they raised their hands. I guess they thought maybe Ted was all for it. Well, his face fell about 5 inches, and he was not pleased that these Democrats are listening to my conservative claptrap. But anyway, it is though, and that it goes back to my statement about people who are embarrassed or something to, wear a flag or something like this, but they're not embarrassed. I mean, when people are offended today by certain things that drive me crazy, because they're not offended by the foul, rotten language we see today, by the way our young people dress, behave, show themselves. Right. That evidently is not offensive. Isn't it something? And that's what I mean about our value system is just, flipped-flopped. But getting back to Jack Kennedy, as you know, Kennedy once said that he had, these great musicians and actors and geniuses in the White House for dinner, and I will just paraphrase it, but he said, I believe tonight we have the brightest, most intelligent people ever to gather here at the White House, with the exception of when Thomas Jefferson dined alone, which is quite a statement. And of course, Jack Kennedy was really very, very smart and very, it was terrible to lose him. But anyway, now Thomas Jefferson, however, has been vilified by the politically correct and by this racist. I call it racist because it is. I want to tell you something. Those of you out there that listen and that really want to hear the truth, I want an answer. Once again, we've got the number up there if you feel like calling. I have this question, Kenny, and I've asked you this before, or said this to you before. We've just had a vote now. Only 1/3 of the population, according to President Obama, voted. That, of course, means to him that 2/3 were against the results. That's his arrogance, I believe. Well, here we have a situation in this politically correct, in-control country. If you vote for somebody because they're black, you're wonderful. If you vote against someone because they're black, you are racist. You're awful. If you vote for someone because they're gay, you are wonderful. You are enlightened, kind. If you vote against someone because they're gay, you are awful. You are homophobic. You don't even deserve a right to vote. If you vote for someone because they are a woman, you are wonderful, especially if you're a man. You're terrific. If you vote against someone because they're a woman, you are sexist. You shouldn't have a vote. If you vote for any minority, you are wonderful. You're giving them a chance. You're enlightened. You're right in that liberal left where you belong. If you vote against a minority, you are one of the problems of this country. Now, the question I ask is, why doesn't logic tell people that both of those choices, both of those actions are wrong? Both. Equally wrong. Because merit is not at the core. Qualifications are not at the core. And qualifications determine how the society will run. Now, that is never entered into the conversation. One of the reasons many have been, over the years, very hesitant to go for affirmative action. Why? Because it once again got its own legs and was based strictly on the color of the people's skin. Just what Martin Luther King said and warned the community not to do. We saw it in public employee unions. Firemen, police, they were challenged in Connecticut. When merit is not at the center of something so important as a vote, then it is null and void, both sides. But that's not what political correctness, that's not what feel-good liberalism ever even thinks to admit to. I do. But you have too many people, just like I said about wearing a flag, about talking about God. Oh, we can't do that. We might offend somebody. Now, we know what the qualifications of today's president were. Basically nothing. And he's not much different. I will say this. Most presidents, they couldn't run a hot dog stand if it, remember George McGovern, Senator George McGovern?
Most definitely.
Pretty nice guy. Well, I don't know, most of you won't. I think it was George McGovern, or was it the other fellow that ran? Okay, I may have the wrong one. George McGovern was a hero, by the way. Who was the other that Bobby Kennedy ran against? Another Irish name.
Not Bob Dole.
No. Irish name that was a Democrat in the primary when Bobby Kennedy decided to run in '68.
Well, maybe out there somebody will call us and tell us.
Maybe somebody will call. Well,
anyway,
whoever this particular former senator was bought a B&B in Connecticut. And he failed. He went out of business. And his comment was, gee, maybe I should have paid more attention to some of the things I signed that were against the business community. And by the way, let me get back to the election. Very bad, once again, very bad. Casino bad. And forcing businesses now to give this sick time, paid this, paid that. Small business. Again, liberals don't get it and they don't care. Democrats are anti-business. I love it when I hear these Democrats running, including Coakley. They do everything in the legal system to make being in business tougher. And then they say they want to create jobs. It just isn't so, ladies and gentlemen. But if you don't want to know that, like most politicians don't, then you're not going to know it. Did you have something to say, Ken?
If I can add a penny to this conversation.
A penny?
A penny. You said that the president's statement was 1/3 of the population voted. I don't know that about the whole
He didn't say the
country.
population. He said the 1/3 that voted, I hear you. The 2/3 who didn't, I hear you too.
Good.
I didn't say population.
All right, I'm sorry then.
No.
I stand corrected. But
Yeah.
the point that I want to make is this. In the last presidential election in Massachusetts, the total vote was 2.4 million people.
Yep.
The total vote.
Out of 320 million?
In Massachusetts.
Oh, I'm sorry,
In
yeah.
Massachusetts.
Oh, it was 16%, I think, wasn't it?
So we have this election, this past election, 2.1 million votes cast in Massachusetts.
That's all?
Yes. That was what was cast in Massachusetts.
What's the total population of Massachusetts?
Charlie got 1 million.
It was 40,000 different anyway, right?
1,030,000, 1,040,000. She got 1 million.
Yeah.
And the statistics came out of the pollsters. One of the guys that brought the figure up sits in for you once in a while on WXDK.
Yeah.
Pat
Dismaris? Yes.
He gave those figures of the last presidential election in Massachusetts, 2.4
Oh, okay, yeah, presidential.
Last
election.
presidential.
So this was a good turnout
2.4.
because usually it's way off from
It's a presidential election, he
Yep.
said, was less.
yeah.
So he obviously, when I say he, the president,
Yes.
isn't hearing Massachusetts.
Well, he's not hearing anything because he's liberal. Kenny, why I'm on here, why I do the radio, is not for me. I'll take the
I thought you were doing it for you.
well, I'm not getting paid on this one. But anyway, slings and arrows, I'll take them.
Yes.
When it comes from people who don't want the truth. That's
Right.
what we need more. We need, I've said this before, I ran for state rep and get beat.
Mm-hmm.
I'd do it again. What we need, though, are more people to run and be willing to lose. I'm nervous about Charlie Baker. All the hoopla, I don't trust him. How's that? I don't trust Republicans.
I've heard that a couple of times.
Yep. I don't trust that they really are hearing the pain of those of us working, paying the bills, both Republicans, Democrats, and independents. That's who went out and voted. They're working stiff today because they're sick and tired of the non-workers, the handouts, the unions controlling elections. Now we're going to see he's too liberal. He's another one of those softy Republicans. Oh, let's work together. My Fanny, working together doesn't work with liberals. I tried to tell Scott Brown that, and he wouldn't listen to it. I'm not saying I'm a big shot. I said the minute and I know, the minute you start catering to Democrats with this idea of getting along, they'll crucify you. And they did. They'll glad hand you to death and behind the scenes laugh at you for being weak enough to go along with them. And that's another feel-good, we got it. Again, the feminine side that drives me crazy in men today and the women. Not all, I don't care. Don't like it, women? Too bad. It's the truth. It's nature. The nurturer. The one that wants things to be right and feel good. There's nothing wrong with that until you get into politics and until you get into failures, social failure, which we have today. Now you got me wound up,
I
Kenny.
know. I realize that because you.
Now, what I'm
cues.
yeah, but what I'm driving. By the way, that clock isn't working
No,
again.
that clock is still broken, Donnie.
Good grief! What do we got
you
here?
have 9 minutes left.
All this government money, and we can't get a clock to work.
I asked to have the clock synced up, and we're still working on it.
Yeah. Well, anyway, what I'm saying is when Deval Patrick ran, now he's been a disgrace. He was a disgrace the first term. He gets reelected. Why? I'll tell you why.
Don't.
The feel good. Feel good. Just what I said. Being black for both Obama and Deval Patrick was another big part of the feminine vote and of the liberal feel-good vote without looking at the job they did. Never mind they didn't have qualifications. But when Patrick came out and said, together we can, he had 70% of the women's vote. Sorry, ladies, I don't care if they're Republican, Democrat, or independent. He had two things going for him. He was sweet, he was handsome, he spoke nice.
There's two things left
For
of
the
his
bird.
administration that I want when he leaves. And I've already told my wife one of them. I want the Cadillac.
Yeah, you
And
think
I
you'll
want-
get his Cadillac back?
Well, I don't know. I want it. And the other thing I want is the curtains that his wife put up in his office.
Yeah.
That were, what were they?
What were they?
$3,000 a window or $4,000?
Yeah, and there were how many windows?
Exactly.
Yeah, it was over 30 grand, I think, for drapes. People losing their jobs, you Democrats.
I want those
Oh, yeah, the
drapes.
Democrats really
Those
care.
drapes, I
You know,
want
it just slays me. Anyway, before we get off, how am I going to know the time? You're going to tell me?
I'm gonna, and when you start hearing your melodious voice,
Yes.
or, I'll tell you what.
Talk to me.
When you start hearing your favorite piano player playing Talk
David
to Me,
McKenna.
Dave McKenna, when you start hearing that, you've got 2 minutes to wrap.
Okay. Now, this is something that you're not going to be aware of. Now, ladies and gentlemen, why do I pick Thomas Jefferson? Do you know why, Kenny?
I'm gonna find out.
He was really the founder of the Democratic Party.
Really?
Yes, he was. He, at 5, began studying under his cousin's tutor. At 9, he studied Latin, Greek, and French. At 14, he studied classical literature and additional languages. At 16, he entered the College of William and Mary. 16. At 19, he studied law for 5 years, starting under George Wythe. At 23, he started his own law practice. At 25, he was elected to the Virginia House of Burgesses. At 31, he wrote the widely circulated Summary Review of the Rights of British America and retired from his law practice. He was only 32 when a delegate to the Second Continental Congress. At 33, he wrote the Declaration of Independence. At 33, he also took 3 years to revise Virginia's legal code and wrote a public education bill and a statute for religious freedom. Religious freedom, all the way back to Thomas Jefferson. At 36, was elected the second governor of Virginia, succeeding Patrick Henry. At 40, he served in Congress for 2 years. At 41, was the American minister to France, negotiated commercial treaties with European nations, along with Ben Franklin and John Adams. At 46, he served as the first Secretary of State under George Washington. Compare him to John Kerry and the rest of the Secretaries of State we now remember. At 55, he drafted the Kentucky Resolution and became the active head of Republican Party. At 57, why did I say that? That's not so. At 57, he was elected the third president of the United States. If I'm wrong, maybe he was a Republican, my word. I take it back, but I don't believe so. I didn't read that. At 57, he was elected the third president of the United States. At 60, he obtained the Louisiana Purchase, doubling the size of America. Imagine the Louisiana Purchase doubled the size of the United States. I was never aware it was that much of a landmass. At 61, he was elected to a second term as president. At 65, he retired to Monticello. At 80, he helped President Monroe shape the Monroe Doctrine. At 81, almost single-handedly created the University of Virginia and served as its first president. At 83, he died on the 50th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, along with, by the way, John Adams, who 2 of them went at it pretty handily over the course of the forming and operation of our first government. But look at that for qualifications. Just look at that. Oh, by the way, and this is the one I wanted to end with. We got time? Did you know that Obama is rated as the 5th best president, Kenny?
You can't be serious.
5th best president. Ladies and gentlemen, you Democrats, see that? I'm fair. I'll tell you. He's rated as the 5th best.
Nobody called me.
Now, let me tell you how it worked out that way. Here's the details.
You got to get the phone ringing now.
Reagan, Lincoln, Washington, Jefferson, and 6 others are tied for first. 15 presidents are tied for second. 17 other presidents are tied for third.
I see where you're going.
Jimmy Carter came in 4th, and good old Obama is 5th. Kind of cute, huh? He's the 5th best.
Did you make that stuff up?
Out of 44.
Or
No,
did you get
no,
it at
this is a library stuff. I always, but anyway, so we're near the end. I had another little quick humorous one. 3 contractors are bidding to fix a broken fence at the White House. One's from Chicago, another's from Kentucky, and the third is from New Orleans. All 3 go to the White House official to examine the fence. The New Orleans contractor takes out a tape measure, does some measuring, then works some figures out with a pencil. Well, he says, I figure the job will run about $9,000. That's $4,000 for materials, $4,000 for my crew, and $1,000 profit for me. The Kentucky contractor also does some measuring and figuring, then says, I can do this job for $7,000. That's $3,000 for materials, $3,000 for my crew, and $1,000 profit for me. The Chicago contractor doesn't measure or figure anything, but leans over to the White House official and whispers, $27,000. The official is incredulous, and he says, you didn't even measure the fence like the other guys. How did you come up with such a high figure? The Chicago contractor whispers back, $10,000 for me, $10,000 for you, and we hire the guy from Kentucky to fix the fence. Done, done, says the government official. You know, if it weren't true, if it weren't so true, when you know what's going on in Boston, and you know government doesn't care about costs, they just don't. These people in government, look at the money they spend on trips. Look at Pelosi. Pelosi takes a 747 to fly from Washington back to her house and gets away with it. If that was a Republican, she'd be vilified by all of the Chris Matthews and all of the again, multiple liberal Democrat-controlled media. And that's about it, ladies and gentlemen. The rantings of Donald P. McKeag will come to a close again pretty shortly. I do hope that you've been entertained a little bit and informed mostly. I don't dislike anyone. I don't like being, I don't know how, critical isn't bad, but I do sometimes find myself I'm just out of sorts with people who should know better and people who are really part of the problem and not part of the solution and don't intend to change. And this election, it's nice to hear there is going to be some change. There's Republicans now, but it remains to be seen. The political system is so corrupt today, and so many in both parties have sold themselves down the drain in order to get elected, and unfortunately to stay elected, that it is tough to be too confident. But let's look on the bright side that there is at least change, and people get up and did something for a change, get off their butts, get away from American Idol. Anyway, thanks for listening, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for viewing. God willing, we'll be back on next Thursday. By the way, we have reruns on Mondays, Tuesdays, and Saturdays. As Kenny said, Tuesdays it's 9 o'clock in the morning, which is a good time. It's 11 o'clock at night on Mondays. And Kenny, I forget what the Saturday is, but God bless. Stay well. Again, thanks very much.